to begin. Welcome, whether you're here or there. Glad you've joined us tonight for Wednesday nights at Northside. We are talking about what people want to know about the Bible. It comes from thousands of questions we've gotten over the years. Know Your Bible, I kind of grouped those questions into a few major topics, and we have covered Bible basics and the afterlife and end times. Tonight we're going to tackle the question of evil, and then we got salvation and why are there so many churches. Those two we got left, we'll see if we have time for those in this session. We are doing this for a couple reasons. We want to correctly handle the Word and understand what it says, and we also want to be able to give an answer if somebody asks us, and that's why we pick these topics, is that's what people in the general public ask a lot about. Tonight we're going to talk about evil. Questions we get like, why do bad things happen to good people? Excuse me. Did God create evil? Where did evil come from? Does God use evil? And a lot of times we get it phrased this way: why would a loving God allow this? Fill in the blank with whatever bad has happened to you or to your family. Why would a loving God allow that? So that's kind of the questions that I lumped under this topic of evil. A lot of this will sound a little bit like Toby covered a couple weeks ago on Sunday mornings. He came at it from the direction of suffering. This is a little bit different, but some of it might sound a little like you've heard it somewhere before, but we're going to approach it from a little different way anyway. I've called it the problem of evil. Now let me talk about that for just a moment. One way it's a problem is the question of evil that we're going to talk about is probably the number one argument of atheists, of people that deny God. That's what they talk about a lot, is the evil in the world. Secondly, I think we need to understand this a little better because we're all going to deal with it. It's kind of easy to say, well, you just have to have faith in God until something bad happens to you or to your family. Then you start to question a little bit if you're human. So for those reasons, it's a problem, the problem of evil. We're going to approach it in stages. I call the first one intellectual answers. This is kind of the classic arguments about why there's evil. We'll talk about the purpose of evil a little bit, possible purposes, and then we'll get to some practical answers, because I think the intellectual answers are different than the practical answers. So that's kind of the attack we're going to take. Some of you may remember a few years ago there was a movie called God Is Not Dead. Remember that? Christian-based movie, and the premise of it was that a college student, a believer, got in this class, and his professor was very anti-God, very denying of God and his existence. And the college student tried to defend God and basically debated with this professor off and on, and he did a pretty good job, had pretty good arguments. But the more they went, the angrier and angrier the professor got. And toward the end of the movie, it finally revealed why he was getting more and more angry as it was harder and harder to deny God. And the root of the problem, his problem, was that, to his view anyway, God had killed his mother when he was 12. Okay. From that point on, he began to argue that God couldn't exist. Okay. So when I say the problem of evil, that's what I'm talking about. It's a problem intellectually when somebody like that has something bad happen to them, and it's a problem for us when we have something bad happen to us. Perhaps we begin to doubt and wonder. All right, so let's get started here. Let's talk just a little bit about evil before we start talking about the answers to evil. The problem is God claims to be all good, and he also claims to be all powerful. One question we got on Know Your Bible one time was from a child. In fact, the mother or grandmother sent it in, I think, and said, forget how old he was, but a young child asked, why doesn't God just kill Satan? Okay. Well, that kind of boils all of it down to that question. God claims to be all good, and he claims to be all powerful, and he also claims in Genesis 1:31, when God saw all that he had made, it was very good. So that's where the problem comes in. The problem is our world is not very good. Genesis 1:31 says it is, but our world is filled with evil. And you can roughly divide evil into a couple of different categories. There's moral evil, it's called, which is the sins that we know of, greed and hatred and deceit and stealing and lust and envy. And they cause harm to people. They cause bad things to happen. And then on another hand, there's natural evil, or evil that just comes from this world. Disease, genetic disorders, famine and death and floods and tornadoes and hurricanes. And you could include things that happen because of man's nature. Of course, they happen because of the moral evil. But rape and abuse and addiction and all, our world's filled with that stuff. Okay? So our world is not very good. And kind of top level thinking about why is that and how could a all good and all powerful God have evil around, the couple of answers that may get us started here. Number one, our world is fallen. It's not what God created. Sin changed it. It got us cursed. And Paul talks a lot about that, how this world and us are groaning until we get out of this mess. So our world is a fallen, cursed world, which helps us understand some of the natural evil, perhaps. And another kind of top-level thought on this is that sin results in evil. Okay? And Toby talked about that a little bit a couple Sundays ago. Why do we have suffering? Well, part of it is just because we live in a fallen world. And another part is because we sin, and that causes suffering. A lot of times it's due to our own stupidity that we suffer. We make bad choices. And sometimes other people make bad choices that cause us harm. So that's kind of a top-level, simple look at thinking about evil. But we want to go a little bit deeper than that. Get down into it just a little bit. So let's start with a couple of intellectual arguments, I call them. And I almost call this philosophical arguments because it's kind of where we are here. This is Intellectually, we're thinking through this. Philosophically, we're trying to decide, okay, why is there evil? So let's do a couple of those, and then we'll get a little more practical in a moment. If you started with an atheist college professor, this is where you'd start. This is where he'd start. He'd start with this syllogism. He would say, did God create everything that exists? Yeah, we'd have to agree with that. And then he'd say, does evil exist? And that sounds reasonable. So yeah, there's evil in this world. Well, the conclusion of those two premises is that, therefore, God created evil. If he made everything that exists and evil exists, then God is responsible for evil. Okay? And that doesn't jive with a all-good, all-powerful, all-loving God. So that's problem kind of number one here. So how do we answer that? Well, the way a syllogism works is the first two premises have to be true for the conclusion to be true. And this one sounds okay until we think about it. And the problem is that premise number two is false. Evil does not exist. And I know that sounds funny because I just said evil does exist. But evil does not exist in and of itself. It is not something. It's not a thing. Okay? It's real because we can see it, but it's not a thing. Now, I told you this was kind of philosophical, so it's a little strange sometimes, but best I can illustrate it, famous illustration is, if I took you out in the backyard and showed you a hole in the ground, I would say, do you see that hole? And you'd say, yeah, there's a hole in the ground. Well, the hole does not exist. Okay, it's real, but it doesn't exist. It is just the absence of dirt. Okay, you can't show me a hole. You can show me a place where there is an absence of dirt, but you can't show me a hole. Okay, maybe a little better illustration is darkness. Does darkness exist? Well, it's real. If we turn off all the lights in here, it would be dark. But darkness does not exist. Darkness is the absence of light. Light is a thing. Light is something, and if you take it away, then you're left with darkness. You can't carry around a bottle of dark if there's light anywhere close. Okay, so and like I said, this is kind of intellectually thinking through this, but evil does not exist in and of itself. So God didn't create evil. Everything he made was good. Now we'll talk about where evil comes from in just a little while, but when we see evil in the world, it's because somebody has removed the good, has not practiced the good. Okay? All right, so that's kind of the first intellectual syllogism that's false because evil doesn't literally exist. Second syllogism that's in our intellectual wheelhouse here is the college professor would say, premise one is an all-good God would destroy evil. Okay, if God was really good, he would want to get rid of evil. Second premise, an all-powerful God could destroy evil. So if he would and could destroy evil, but evil still exists, then no such God exists. A all-good, all-powerful God wouldn't allow evil to exist. Okay? So that's Part of the problem is it still says evil exists, but ignoring that and admitting that, yeah, there is evil in the world, this one goes a little bit deeper than number one to the question of why there is evil. So the answer to this one comes in what we mean by God creating good. And it really gets down to the basic answer to all questions about why there's evil. The answer I would propose is that all God created was good. In fact, it was perfect. Okay? Now, we have to understand what perfect is. Perfection requires free will. Okay, the possibility of evil exists in free will. And almost every question we get in this genre on Know Your Bible, at some point we get around to mentioning free will is to blame. Okay? Free will is necessary, which we'll talk about here next, but free will is what creates the opportunity for the possibility of evil. When God created perfect creation, he created mankind, and the angels for that matter, to have a relationship with him, to have a loving relationship with him. He wanted to have somebody to have that loving relationship with him, he tells us. So to make that possible, this creation, either angelic or mankind, has to have this feature, let's call it a feature, of free will. This feature of free choice. This feature of being possible to not love God. Okay? And bear in mind, we're still in the intellectual thinking through this kind of thing, so let's do a couple of illustrations that might help. Used this one before. I programmed my computer at home that when I go to my office and boot it up, it says, "Good morning, O wonderful master. You are the most wonderful owner that I have ever had. Everything you do is perfect." Okay? Now, does that give me a warm feeling? Okay. First of all, you're saying, he's really stupid if he did that. But if I did program a computer to do that, would I claim that my computer loves me? No, because I made it do that. I programmed it where that's the only option it's got. Okay. Now that may help you understand why, if God created a perfect bearer of a loving relationship, he had to give it the feature of being able to not love him. Okay? Another illustration, when you get a new grandchild and that grandchild is old enough to walk and maybe run a little bit, and you walk into that room, excuse me, and that grandchild sees you and throws its arms out and yells, "Granddad," and runs towards you, how's that make you feel? That's really good stuff. Okay, why is it good stuff? You could have a robot that would do that, but it wouldn't make you feel good because there's no option. The reason that's good is because that grandchild has the option not to like you. Okay? Children are the same way, and sometimes it comes to that point where they choose not to. But the option, the possibility of choosing to love or choosing not to love is what makes that perfect. Okay? So, what I'm saying here in the answer is that what God created was good. It was perfect. And to be perfect, he had to put that in there. Now, when he did, what did he risk? He risked that his creation would choose not to love him. Okay? Which is what happened. Okay? First, in the angelic realm, the rebellion of Satan, which we don't know a whole lot about, but Satan was created good. Okay? He was one of the angels. For some reason, and from some verses we think it was pride and other things, but he chose to rebel. And we believe he probably got about a third of the angels to rebel along with him, and God cast them out of heaven. It's the consequences of sin. But that's when evil entered the cosmos, was when Satan made that first choice. Okay, I will choose not to love and obey God. I will rebel against him, and I would choose to be God myself. Okay? It entered the physical universe when Adam and Eve fell through the false teachings of Satan, but they made the same choice. God told me this. I think this is better. I will do what I want. Okay? I will not love and obey God. So evil entered the physical universe there. God created Adam and Eve both good and free. They had free will. They got to make the choice, and man ever since has been able to make the choice. So what this kind of boils down to is evil wasn't created, wasn't part of the creation. It's an exercise of our free will. When we choose not to do good, like we choose to turn the lights off, we get darkness. Choose to take the dirt out, we get a hole. We choose not to do good, we find evil. Okay, so those are the main arguments that a atheist professor would probably make with us, and that's our best answer to them. I'll mention it a little bit later, but of course this requires a biblical worldview. If you don't have a biblical worldview, it doesn't matter. And you don't know what to do then. Okay, now, looking at those two intellectual kind of answers, humans still say, well, couldn't God do something? Even with all that, okay, I agree free will's got to be there. I agree evil's the absence of good and all that. But surely, God could stop some of this stuff. Couldn't he do something else? So I made a list of three options, perhaps, that God could do, mankind thinks. So let's kind of work through those. First of all, and we've gotten this question, why didn't God make people just so they can't sin? Okay, well, we've already talked about that. That would be a robot. If we don't have free will, if we don't have free choice, we can't have a relationship. So we've already kind of covered that one. Second one's a little more interesting. Well, God could compensate for really evil stuff by supernaturally intervening. Okay? He could stop the drunk driver from hitting somebody. If he saw it was going to happen, he could just stop it. Okay? He could stop an addicted husband from abusing his wife. He could just stop it. Just freeze him. Do something. Okay? He could have stopped all of those airplanes on 9/11. He could have fixed the engines where they couldn't take off. Okay? He could intervene and compensate for somebody wanting to do something evil and stop it supernaturally. Well, what's wrong with that? I mean, it sounds pretty good when you start, but then you start thinking through it. Okay, I want him to stop the really horrible stuff, but what about lesser evil? Where would I have him stop? Okay, I want him to stop all stealing, all thievery. But next week I want to fudge just a little bit on my taxes. Do I want him to mess with that? It gets a little tricky to decide exactly what you want him to stop. Well, let's have him stop all murder. Well, does he stop all the hateful thoughts that led up to it? And you see what's happening here. We're getting pretty close back to robots again. Once you start intervening with free will, you don't know where to stop. Well, you do kind of know where to stop. You want him to stop before he gets to anything that you want to do. Just stop all the other bad things. Okay? Adultery destroys marriages and all that. So why doesn't he just stop all adultery? Well, to do that, does he just stop it when it's ready to be a sexual act? Or does he stop inappropriate thoughts that led to it? Or does he go further and just take away male-female attraction? That would eliminate the problem. Okay, you see what a mess this is once you start saying, okay, he made a perfect creation with free will, but now I want him to mess with it. And I'm not saying he doesn't sometimes. We read stories in the Bible where he did intervene to suit his sovereign purpose, but in the operation of the world, us deciding where he stops and what he stops gets very, very difficult. Third one, some people have proposed, well, when somebody does something evil, why doesn't God just judge them right then and remove them? Just zap, they're gone. Well, once again, we get to deciding, well, how much evil am I going to tolerate? Because the Bible does say we've all sinned and fallen short. There wouldn't be many of us left if he really judged and removed us immediately. On this one, 9/11, we talked about that. He could have, those 19 hijackers, he could have struck them dead in their seats. He could have said, all right, I know you're going to do something really, 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 really bad, so I'm judging you and you're gone. Okay, well, that'd be okay with me, but where does he stop? Okay, so all the options sound pretty good until you try to put them into practice. Okay? So instead of creating robots, instead of intervening all the time, 100% of the time, instead of judging and removing immediately, what he did was he allowed a real world with real consequences. Okay? Now, how did he try to lessen the difficulties of that? Well, he said his people are supposed to be a good influence. Okay? In the Old Testament, his people were supposed to show other people what following God's rules was good for. They were supposed to be an example. Tells us the same thing today. Christians are supposed to be salt and light. And we look at it and we say, well, the world's full of evil. Well, it is, but you imagine, well, you can't imagine how much worse it would be if there wasn't a Christian influence. And sometimes we think we don't have much influence, but over the centuries we have had a huge influence on the world. When God's teachings are followed, which are given to help us get through this world and have the most abundant life possible, even though this world is full of moral evil and natural evil, when we practice his teachings, we have a lot better life. Yeah. Okay, wrap up for tonight anyway. With a biblical worldview, and I want to stress that again, that's required. If you don't believe there's a God, if you don't believe the Bible's worth looking at, then the problem of evil is not solvable. You just conclude there's no God and you're done, and if you conclude that, you can do anything you want. Okay? But with a biblical worldview, which hopefully most of us in this room have, God didn't create evil. He didn't make it, but he does allow evil. Okay? And that's a consequence of free will. He can't destroy evil without destroying freedom. Okay? That's where it comes from, and that's why I said that's kind of the bottom line answer every time as well. That comes from free will. If we didn't have free will, we could prevent evil, but we'd also eliminate any kind of loving relationship. I didn't mention it when we were back on that point of the illustration of a grandchild coming to you. You can raise children like programming a computer and tell them the only thing they can do is say what you want them to say and all that. That'll work for a while, not very long, but it'll mess everything up. Okay, so the free will's important. Okay. Last point I put on here is just because evil's not destroyed right now doesn't mean it won't be. It will be destroyed. Okay, that is God's plan. That's what he tells us about, and when we get into the practical stuff next week, we'll find out how important that is. God is going to even the books up someday. At the end of time, which we've been talking about for the last 3 or 4 weeks, justice is going to prevail, and there will be no impure things in the heavenly realm. All right, I figured we wouldn't get all the way tonight, but this is a good break point, a little bit early, but next time we'll talk about some the purposes of evil and some practical answers, perhaps, that will be helpful if we're dealing with the problem of why did this happen and why didn't God prohibit it. All right, thanks for your attention. You got a few extra minutes of visiting time, so you're on your own.